27th of May 1994. Clare Morris is killed in a car crash in Aberdeen.
It was like somebody had dropped a ton of bricks on me.
Clare's husband, Malcolm, is also devastated. But Webster's tears hide a dark taboo. He is a pathological liar with an insatiable appetite for wealth and a sadistic plan to murder for money.
She's essentially rubbish that can be burnt and thrown away.
And after killing his wife, Webster would move to the other side of the world and begin a carbon copy plan to murder again.
Got really angry and irritated and said to me, oh, for God's sake, you would have died happy.
For 15 years, Webster thought he'd got away with his crimes, but finally, science exposed his lies. 'Britain's Darkest Taboos' reveals the shocking true stories behind the most horrific acts of familial crime, including murder.
He stood up and licked the blood off the knife and he spat down her body.
Torture.
People call him an animal, but he's not an animal. An animal wouldn't do that to another animal.
And abuse.
I probably should have died, and I tell you what, I wish I had.
3rd of September 1993, and there's a wedding in Aberdeen in Scotland. The groom is Malcolm Webster, and his bride is 32-year-old Clare Morris. Clare's brother is Peter.
She asked me to give her away, as our father had died some years before, which I was delighted to do. And on the wedding day itself, I travelled in a horse and carriage through the streets of Aberdeen with my sister, and leading up to the university chapel where she got married. She was extraordinarily excited about it.
To Malcolm and Clare.
He was just very full of himself at the wedding, Malcolm. Absolutely full of himself.
He's just got a microphone on. Oh, earthquake! She took us around.
1, 2, 3.
She was beaming, she was radiant. It was as though something had made this huge difference to her, and you could see that in an instant that she was besotted in love with this chap. And my initial reaction to that was I was very, very pleased for her.
Having lost their father at a young age, Peter, Clare and their mum are incredibly close.
There was only Clare and I and Mum. She was a loving sister. We were very close. We were the firmest of friends.
After growing up in Australia, Clare later moved to Kent in the UK, and after school, trained as a nurse.
She definitely followed Mum into nursing. Obviously, having seen Mum in nursing, it was something that appealed to her. And in the first part of her adult life, in her first part of her working life, her career was the most important thing.
At a party, she meets the man of her dreams, a qualified nurse, and falls madly in love with Malcolm Webster. The pair move up to Scotland, away from her close-knit family.
Clare, she would say how much she loved him and how complete her life was with him, and this is something that she envisaged happiness for the rest of her life.
But what is it about Webster that persuaded Clare to move almost 500 miles away from her family? Emma Kenny is a psychologist and has been looking into Clare and Malcolm's relationship.
When Clare met Webster, he was a charming, charismatic, effervescent kind of character. He was somebody that she really connected with and warmed to. And every part of him displayed characteristics that she could trust. He was very generous, he was very giving, and he was very loving. And for Clare, at 27 years of age, someone who'd devoted her life to her career, this was a real change and the opportunity to be with somebody that potentially she could spend her life with.
He seemed like the perfect gentleman, which is exactly what she would have wanted. He was a sort of Colin Firth type character.
Everyone has fallen for Webster's charms. The couple settle into married life in the rural village of Tarvis. And Webster spoils his wife rotten.
He knew how to impress a young lady with expensive gifts. In fact, that was part of the allure, I think.
The fact that he spends such a lot of money on Clare initially suggests he's trying to create a picture that he has a great deal, but it also suggests that he's quite a greedy character. He's somebody who likes the finer things in life, and that's okay if you can afford them, but if you can't, it's certainly a worrying sign.
When you see somebody spending money on that sort of level, you naturally assume that they've got a degree of wealth.
But Webster is not just generous. This is a man with an insatiable appetite for wealth. And this picture-perfect marriage is just part of a sinister plan to get rich quick. Laura Richards profiles criminals for police forces across the country. She's been looking into Webster's past.
So Malcolm Webster came from a good family and a good home, and he was privately educated. And to all intents and purposes, he was quite affable, he was witty, charming, described as a gentleman. What I certainly see with power and control and the dynamics and the tools that people use, certainly charm disarms people. And that was one of the tools in his toolkit that he used to be able to formulate relationships with people, but also appear as one thing, where all the time he had a very clear financial motivation. From an early age, he wanted to accumulate wealth and he wanted that lifestyle and aspired to it. So everything that he did was about hatching a plan to be able to attain those things in life.
Like many couples, Clare and Malcolm have life insurance. But Webster has a plan. He's plotting to cash in on Clare's policy within months.
Clare would have probably thought it was very sensible to have life insurance policies. I can imagine he's taken out one for him, one for her, and Clare's probably gone, yes, that's very sensible. I mean, Clare was a very practical person. So, I don't think Clare would have been alarmed by the fact that he wanted to get those things in place.
But what we know is that Webster is doing this not because he's concerned about their future or protecting Clare. It's purely that he intends to cash in on her murder.
Just weeks after the wedding, Clare begins to feel ill. She tells her brother Peter.
The first indication we had that something wasn't right was when Clare was called mother a few times, and she said that Malcolm was tired, but she was also very tired. She said she'd fall asleep in the car, and she used to tell Mum, and then she said she complained of being tired, but it wasn't something any of us drew any major alarm to.
But what Peter doesn't know is that Clare is not ill. She's been drugged by Webster, with drugs suspected to have been stolen from the hospital where he works as a nurse.
He would have thought these things through. Certainly being a nurse gives him access to various drugs, and he's using temazepam, slowly poisoning Clare. So he's using his skill set.
He's planning on killing her, so the more sedated she will become, the more easy it will be for him to carry out his actions.
And once Malcolm feels confident he's keeping Clare sedated, he decides it's time to put his deadly plan into action. A plan which involves faking a car crash in which he survives and Clare dies.
Leading up to the crash, Webster will be planning and plotting, thinking about how to execute the best murder possible. What he wants is a flawless scenario where he's the victim, people feel sorry for him, and he's entitled to claim the insurance money on Clare's body. He will have worked hard to create, in his opinion, a flawless, perfect murder. And the reality is, he'll be enjoying it because finally, he's about to get his reward.
May 27th, 1994. Webster drugs Clare and then takes her on a car journey. This would be the last journey Clare would ever make.
Webster knows that his wife is in the car, strapped in, sedated. So he knows that there is absolutely no way that she can get out.
When Webster is certain Clare is asleep, he pulls the car off the road, down a bank, rolling towards a tree.
And then he pours petrol over the vehicle and sets it on fire. Imagine knowing that you're executing your wife in such a horrific way. And basically, Clare is left alone to burn to death.
The fire brigade that coming along said it was the most intense fire they'd ever seen from a mile away. The flames were leaping 20, 30 feet or something. It was just ridiculous. And they got him into an ambulance and what have you. And then a fireman, a very brave fireman, tried to retrieve what was left of Clare. Her skull had fused to the back of the top part of the chair, her thigh bones had fused to the bottom part. There wasn't much left of her, poor love. It was a pretty horrific thing to do to somebody.
Webster is taken away, playing the part of a grieving husband. One of the first officers on the scene is Derek MacDonald. He's come back to the exact spot where the crash took place.
When I arrived, the four-wheel drive vehicle was sitting in this position here, with the nose of the vehicle being almost against this tree, but it was fully engulfed in fire. The engine compartment, the passenger compartment, the boot area, everything was well ablaze. Pillars of smoke and steam coming from the vehicle. It was evident that there was someone still in the passenger seat, but because of the ferocity of the fire, they would have to be judged to be deceased.
Webster is totally disassociated from Clare as a human being. At this point, all he sees is the fact that shortly he's going to have a lot of money available to him. He's not caring about her pain, the fact that she's going to leave her family behind, and also the utter disrespect for her body. He's happy to let it burn and disintegrate. And basically, that denotes the way he felt about Clare all along. She's essentially rubbish that can be burnt and thrown away.
Malcolm is interviewed by police, but he hides his crimes well. And it wouldn't be long before he would begin another plan to commit another murder on a new, unsuspecting wife.
He was a generous personality, almost to the point of embarrassment.
Webster is an individual who has an excellent blueprint as far as he's concerned, and that's his dangerous nature, that he's spinning a web again to entrap another innocent victim.
The 27th of May 1994. A car is in flames off a country road in Aberdeenshire. The driver was Malcolm Webster. In the passenger seat, his wife Clare. She thought she'd married her perfect man.
Clare would say how much she loved him and how complete her life was with him, and she envisaged happiness for the rest of her life.
But what Clare didn't know was that from day one, Webster had murder in mind. This was all part of a sinister plot, a deliberate car crash, to cash in on Clare's life insurance policy. Clare dies at the scene. There is nothing anyone can do to save her. Her brother Peter is told the news by his wife.
I was stunned to start with. The first initial reaction was just being stunned. But pretty quickly, jumped in my car, made my way over to Mum's. She was obviously extremely distraught. And I think the first thing I did for her then was I rang the Grampian police to try and find out some details of what had happened. Because the first part to any sort of closure is to find out the truth.
Webster is a convincing liar. He tells police he swerved to avoid a motorcycle and smashed into a tree. He tried to rescue Clare, but her door was jammed shut. But someone at the scene is not convinced.
The word of the day was hooky. There was something hooky had happened, that it wasn't a normal accident. There were none of the usual signs that you would tend to find at an accident scene.
Firemen and police officers who attend lots of different scenes, they get a good sense about what sounds right and what sounds correct in terms of the sequence of events and what unfolded, versus when somebody actually is saying a number of untruths.
I was able to look around the scene to see if I could work out what had caused the accident. And so I went up and down the road looking for skid marks, gouges in the embankments. There were none. In fact, the embankment that the vehicle came over was totally undamaged. The vehicle must have just ridden over the embankment and slowly down this bank here. The driver's door was clear and open. The passenger door was closed, but there was nothing preventing it from being opened. It was clear into this area here.
June 1994. Clare's funeral is held in Tarvis, the tiny village where Malcolm and Clare had lived. Webster appears as the perfect grieving widower.
He didn't say a lot at the funeral. He appeared to be in a complete state of shock as well. We got down to the funeral and went through the service and what have you, and then at the end of the service, the male members of the family have to act as the pallbearers and carry the coffin out. And I was fine, I was there, I was supporting Mum up until they put Clare on my shoulder. And then it was like somebody had just opened the sky up. And the whole reality of the situation became so apparent just in that moment. It was like somebody had dropped a ton of bricks on me. I'll never forget feeling like that, ever. And we tried to respectfully carry her coffin out to the hearse. It just felt as though a little tiny piece of wood was separating me from Clare. And it was as though somebody opened the sky up and just dropped everything on me. It was something that I'd been holding back on to try and support other people like Mum and what have you, and then suddenly I felt the full force of it. We were all standing around the graveside. In my right hand I was holding on to Malcolm's left hand. I was in floods of tears. And I looked at Malcolm and he was also in floods of tears. And that, more than anything else, convinced me that it had been a genuine accident.
Imagine the disrespect in that moment. Clare's killer holding the hand of Clare's brother. It demonstrates the lack of empathy, understanding of human emotion and callous nature that Webster holds. He's a dreadful human being.
The real grief comes after the funeral. It hits you in stages, but after the funeral, the real grief was. And Clare was just on my mind 24 hours a day. It was it's just like a piece of you had been ripped out, like a piece of yourself. It was horrible, and I couldn't talk. I found myself unable to talk to anyone. I kept trying to be very British, stiff upper lip, I can deal with this. And yet inside I was just completely falling apart.
And Peter soon loses touch with his brother-in-law.
I thought, you know, he's had a chapter of his life, and does he constantly want to be reminded of that by talking to the family of the person he's lost? So I sort of, even then I felt for him, you know, that I wasn't going to impose on him and things like that. I didn't want to add to his grief.
But Webster isn't grieving. Having cashed in on Clare's life insurance policy, he spends the next 4 years living the high life.
Webster is an absolute narcissist. He loves the image of fast living and being successful. And of course, the easiest part of this for him is that he hasn't had to work for it. It was quite a simple equation. I want money, I murder my wife. And that mentality exists within him. So as soon as the money runs out, clearly he's looking for his next victim.
And to find that next victim, Webster would travel thousands of miles. "4 years after killing Clare, Webster is in New Zealand. He now has a new wife called Felicity Drum and a baby boy. And he's using his same old tried and tested tricks."
Malcolm was always incredibly attentive and considerate. He was a generous personality, almost to the point of embarrassment.
Webster is an individual who has an excellent blueprint as far as he's concerned, and that's his dangerous nature, that he's spinning a web again to entrap another innocent victim.
Webster tells Felicity about the death of his first wife, explaining she'd been involved in a tragic car crash.
I think when finding out that someone has lost a partner in that kind of way, it naturally raises sympathy from you, and I think I felt supportive and wanted to be kind and caring. I think it invoked those sorts of feelings.
Webster isn't looking at Felicity as another person, a partner, somebody he can spend his life with. He's looking at a meal ticket, somebody that eventually he can remove from his life so he can gain more funds. And that's all he cares about, what Felicity stands for, and that's cash.
And it wouldn't take long for Webster to begin a carbon copy plan to kill his new wife and cash in on her savings. But this time, he's getting greedy. He wants more cash. He begins forging Felicity's signatures, taking out life insurance policies in her name. Then, just as he did with Clare, Webster begins spiking her meals and drinks.
These episodes would often begin with a feeling of blurred vision or double vision and unsteadiness on my feet. My speech would sometimes become a little bit slurred. I would stagger around as if I was drunk and then would fall into a deep sleep.
But getting away with any sort of behaviour, and certainly when it's a criminal act, means that it positively reinforces someone if they don't get caught. They get away with it once, they think, I can probably get away with this again. And that's exactly what he started to reenact, getting access to temazepam and repeating exactly what he did with Clare.
But it wouldn't take long for Felicity to become suspicious.
These events occurred after he had prepared a meal or a drink for me. They were always at the weekends, never inconveniently when I had to be able to go to work. You know, they seemed to magically occur at weekends. And sometimes on eating my meal, I was aware of a very acrid, bitter taste in the food. And I did challenge him and say that, you know, the food tastes to me like someone has crushed pills and put them in my food. It was an acrid, bitter taste.
But Felicity isn't just concerned about her health. She's also worried about Webster's extravagant spending.
I assumed, I guess, a lot of that was that he'd come from a background where it hadn't been an issue and that he was just generous by nature.
Her concerns would soon be raised. The couple are buying a house together. Webster promises to put thousands towards it, but the money just isn't arriving.
The settlement date had come and gone. The money from Scotland hadn't arrived. We were incurring penalty payments. I was running the risk of losing a fairly substantial deposit that I had paid. And it was during a very intense, pressured time where daily he was having to come up with credible excuses as to the delay, that the 600,000 that I thought was imminently arriving from the UK didn't exist. He was trying his best to prevent me from finding that out.
The net is tightening on Webster. his lies could be about to be uncovered.
There was a total of 9 life insurance policies, which collectively was in excess of $1 million on my death.
Webster has no time to waste. He has to kill Felicity and carry out the next stage of his evil plan. In the late 1990s, Felicity Drum is living with her new husband Malcolm Webster in Auckland, New Zealand. But what she doesn't know is that Webster is a murderer. He killed his first wife in Scotland in a staged car crash some 5 years earlier and has since been living on Clare's cash. And now, after drugging Felicity, Webster's about to drive her to her death. February 1999. Webster says the money has finally arrived in his account for the purchase of their new house, and he wants to go out and celebrate. The couple head to the countryside for a picnic.
I can remember turning off onto one of these roads. My next memory is waking up and the sound of Malcolm's mobile phone ringing. Sort of coming to and sort of sitting up and answering that and being able to look into the distance and see him wandering off with the baby in a pushchair away from the car. He was probably 50 to 100 metres away from the car. And I sort of answered the telephone, and it was my father saying, "Look, something's happened. I don't want you to get into a big discussion about it with Malcolm, but you're just to tell him something urgent has happened back here at home. I don't want to get into it on the phone. You need to return to Auckland immediately." My father's voice on the phone engendered real concern in me because he sounded anxious and a little alarmed. So I opened the car door and called out to Malcolm, who expressed surprise, obviously, that I was awake, and then got really angry, which, you know, I couldn't quite understand. Angry with me for being awake and insisting that I lie back down. And I was like, you know, don't be ridiculous. I'm awake now and Dad's just rung and we need to get straight back to Auckland.
Felicity and Webster set off back to her parents.
As we pulled up into the driveway there, Malcolm said, "Look, your father is going to tell you a whole big story, and essentially it's crap. You've just got to trust and believe in me, and, you know, I can explain everything." And we literally were in the middle of this conversation as my parents arrived, and Malcolm just took off. He didn't stay to be confronted or even have a discussion. He just left straight away.
Concerned about finances, Felicity had asked her parents to check her accounts, and they'd made a chilling discovery.
My parents started to explain that all my money gone from my bank account. We discovered that he'd opened up a private mailbox where he'd redirected all of our mail, including bank mail, which had prevented me from discovering that gradually the account was being fleeced. There were inquiries to real estate agents back in the Cornwall and Devon area, suggesting he would be returning shortly to the UK with his infant son, and then at the bottom of his briefcase there was a total of 9 life insurance policies, which collectively was in excess of $1 million upon my death, and they had my signature forged on them. It became blindingly obvious. There was no going back then about what his intent was and what was going on.
She's built her world with this man, and now she realises, of course, that all she's ever been was part of an intricate plan. This must have blown her world into smithereens.
Facing the horror and hurt that someone whom I'd cared about and loved and thought that I had a future with and lived an honest life with, had so completely deceived me and was so evil. I thought I've brought this person into my family's life and brought all that hurt to them It was, it was a terrible, terrible time.
Felicity now suspects the car fire his first wife was involved in may not have been an accident. And when her family find a petrol canister in the car, she's convinced she has narrowly escaped death.
It seemed so clear that in light of what had happened to me, Malcolm was certainly responsible for Clare's death.
Felicity meets Webster to confront him with her suspicions.
I sort of said to him, why would you do this to me? I can't believe, what I've discovered. I've seen the content of your laptop and everything else. What were you thinking? And he got really angry and irritated and said to me, oh, for God's sake, he would have died happy. As if to justify that he had, given me love and marriage and a child, and I was happy. Shouldn't I be grateful? I wasn't even going to have known had things gone his way, and that was his way of justifying what he was doing.
Webster flees and heads back to the UK. Felicity reports him to the police in New Zealand.
Ultimately, despite Interpol initially being involved, the Scottish police felt that there wasn't significant evidence for them to reopen and examine the case, including Clare's death. And so it was hugely frustrating at the time.
Years pass. Webster's running free. But Felicity's family are determined to get justice and persist with trying to get the police in the UK to reopen the investigation into Clare's death.
They were outraged by his behaviour and were determined that, something was going to happen about it.
But it wasn't until the spring of 2006 that the police in Scotland finally revisit the case, after a continuous push by Felicity's family. The lead officer is Charles Henry.
When I spoke to the detective in New Zealand, without a shadow of a doubt, the original fatal road accident was highly suspicious because it bore all the hallmarks of what was happening in New Zealand. At that particular point, we were facing a highly dangerous individual who was a threat to any women that he was going to be with.
For 14 years, Peter, Clare's brother, had thought his sister was killed in a tragic car accident, until he receives a call.
It was February 2008, and I think I had a phone call from the police, and the family liaisons officers rang me and said, we're reopening the investigation into Clare's death. It was as though I'd had a wound on my arm that had healed up, and suddenly somebody had taken a big knife and reopened the whole thing. It was that dramatic.
The investigating officers need to move fast. Malcolm has been back in Scotland for some 9 years and has another potential victim in his sight, and the pair are planning to marry.
This was a modus operandi that worked for him. He'd been hugely successful, and why would he not continue doing it? Because he was getting away with it. So I was really concerned for any future prospective victims.
It was a fast-moving investigation for us. Because of my local connections, I was able very quickly to find out who Malcolm Webster was currently with. They were planning to get married, and this was causing us great concern.
The police know that Webster is still living the high life, but worryingly, his new fiancée has now transferred her will into his name.
So for us to turn up and basically blow that apart would be totally devastating for her.
They must move quickly to build a case of murder before more lives are lost. In 1994, Clare Morris died in a car crash. Her husband, Malcolm Webster, insisted it was an accident. But in reality, Clare was murdered by Webster in a cruel plot to pocket her life insurance.
Webster is totally disassociated from Clare as a human being. She's essentially rubbish that can be burnt and thrown away.
5 years later, Webster attempted to stage a carbon copy killing on his second wife, Felicity, but he failed, and now his lies are catching up with him.
He got really angry and irritated and said to me, "Oh, for God's sake, you would have died happy."
It's 2008, and Grampian police continue to investigate a crash which killed Clare Morris 14 years earlier. They know Webster is back in Scotland, living with a new fiancée, and they need to act quick. They begin to re-interview witnesses, among them Derek MacDonald.
I thought I was vindicated in my suspicions that I had earlier about how it looked like a set-up job, and now someone was looking into it seriously, and so I was quite happy to hear that.
Webster originally told police he had swerved to avoid a motorbike, but Derek always thought his story didn't add up.
Basically, I told the police officer that I had had time at the incident, unlike most of the other officers there. I had time to look around and study the scene closely, study the vehicle for damage, the embankments for damage, the road for skid marks. None of these things I found. And of course that in itself is extremely suspicious, and they of course took this on board to launch a further investigation.
But a case can't be built on suspicion alone. The police need evidence. Proving Webster staged a car crash would require a specialist team of experts. They call on the Transport Research Lab, a group of researchers who analyse crashes to uncover what happened. The chief investigator is Stephen Jowett, who also investigated the crash that killed Princess Diana.
Webster was interesting and unusual in that it was a cold case, and it hadn't been investigated on the basis that there was any particular criminality involved with it. So the basic level of data available to us was fairly poor, and it was also quite dated given that it was some 16 years previous.
Webster insists that he swerved to avoid a motorbike and crashed into a tree. The car then exploded. But using graphic reconstructions, Stephen is able to prove that Webster is lying.
We input the variables that he dictated soon after the collision to the police. And what was very obvious was that this collision didn't occur in the way that he said. The car goes in far too fast, and it doesn't end up in the right sort of orientation. So clearly that couldn't have been what happened. So we then start reducing the speed of approach of the car. And the more we reduce the speed of the car, the further we get from Mr. Webster's testimony, to the point where, in effect, it's no longer his collision, it's something entirely different.
Stephen and his team examine the speed the car had to be driving to make it crash into a tree and burst into flames.
Eventually, we resorted to two particular reconstructions which show that the vehicle going slowly into the woodland on paths which are dictated solely by a controlled turn, either to the right or to the left.
The reconstructions prove Webster actually drove the car down a bank, parked it against a tree, and then set it on fire, exactly as Derek MacDonald had suspected.
I would say that the advances in technology was able to confirm our suspicions. We could suspect that an incident had occurred in a certain way, as we did with this one, but technology came in, built computer models, and proved that that is exactly what had happened.
As well as the reconstructions, police interview many witnesses. Finally, after an investigation lasting more than 2 years, officers feel they can prove murder. They arrest Webster. His new fiancée discovers she's been living with a murderer.
She was certainly engaged to him, certainly planning to spend the rest of her life with him. So for us to turn up and basically blow that apart would be totally devastating for her.
Peter is told they now firmly believe Clare's death was not an accident.
And then in February 2009 they actually charged him, which made things a bit more real, but then when they did that, I desperately wanted to know what had happened. I mean, I really wanted to know. Because it's like you've been conned for a number of years. You've been completely conned. You need to know the truth. The truth is actually prerequisite for anybody getting closure about anything.
For Peter to discover that his sister had been brutally murdered and not died in what he considered a tragic accident would have blown his whole grief process into smithereens. Essentially, he would have gone back to day one of feeling he'd lost his sister. And the realisation of that makes him feel incredibly vulnerable. Suddenly he thinks to himself, you know, if this guy who I trusted could have conned me to such a huge degree, then who else can? It basically means that you feel that you can trust no one, not even the people closest to you.
I just completely and utterly lost my faith in humanity for a while. It was as though somebody had... It was like somebody had redefined everything that I'd accepted as foundational truth as a youth. It's like things that were told you as a child but not actually true, you know. It was mind-blowing.
February 2011. Malcolm Webster goes on trial for murder. For Peter, it's a chance to finally hear the truth he so desperately wants.
It revealed to me a completely different person to the one that I thought I'd known. It revealed to me a liar, a philanderer, a womanizer, a murderer, someone who had incredible avarice. There was the graphic description of the fire and of what it did to Clare, and that was pretty difficult. Very difficult, actually.
During the trial, a number of women attend to give evidence against Webster, including Felicity.
I came to recognise Peter Morris. He found out about all of this so many years after Clare's death, to realise that all this time, you know, that some terrible wrong had befallen somebody whom you love and that you'd been so completely unaware of it. I think he found the trial a really important avenue for him to gain in his knowledge and understanding, so he could try and get some sort of perspective and context about what had happened to his sister.
The case is one of the longest in Scottish history. Finally, in May 2011, Webster is found guilty of murdering Clare, attempting to murder Felicity, and attempting to bigamously marry a third woman to gain access to her estate. He is later jailed for life, with a minimum term of 30 years.
We were, as a family, absolutely delighted by all of the findings of the court, and I think his sentence aptly reflects the horribleness of his crimes and the fact that he feels no remorse, that it was all premeditated, and, you know, given the opportunity, he was about to do it again.
I'm just pleased that we've got recognition for Clare. This is actually what happened to her. This is what we've been suffering for the last 3.5 years now, getting to this point, and I'm glad it's here. And I'm glad it's resolved. They've dubbed him the Black Widower or something, and I think the association between him and spinning a web of lies is quite appropriate.
That's what's disturbing for people, the fact that it's someone you know, that it's not outside just everyday people's reality, that there's people like him wandering around and you maybe know them, you know.
If anything, it taught me that you just have to be a little bit more cautious in life as to who you trust and when you trust them. because we could all be living next door to the next Malcolm Webster. It was an experience that did nearly destroy me, nearly destroyed my family, but thank God it didn't. And thank God, over a period of time, we managed to put the pieces back together and move on.